Welcome everyone to our Wednesday morning class that we plan to name One Day in the Future. We're here today with some wonderful people from Sun City, and of course, we have a wonderful Houstonian here as Noel Foreman's here, and we're going to have a great time. And thank everyone out there who is on YouTube for waiting just a sec. We had a little technological difficulty getting in. And so welcome everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. We know a lot of you have already got your injections, which is great. We pray that everybody will get them soon. And we're going to study today, of course, women in the Bible. This is part deux. Deux in French is two, right? All right, good. Then I'm doing great.
Yes.
All right.
Deux.
So, deux.
Deux. D-E-U-X.
Deux. Part deux. So
very well.
Last week we talked about some of women who were really more well known, like Eve and Miriam. However, they both actually have very tiny parts, but the impact of what they did is much greater. Then there were women who were were not known at all almost, like Shiphrah and Puah and Tamar, who did incredible things, but are not as well known. Today we're going to continue with the balance of that. Some who are well known, some who aren't, some who have more stage time than others, two who actually have their own books. So obviously we know who those are now. And we're going to look at some who are a little bit more controversial. But the first thing we're going to look at is the idea of a prophet. What is a prophet? So a prophet can be a man or a woman. And basically, a prophet just tells people what they're doing wrong and what's going to happen if they keep doing something wrong. And if the punishment comes, then they have to start comforting people. They are people who have to live outside society. They can't have regular jobs because they can't be beholden to anyone. They can't have a boss. So they can be rich, they can be poor, they can be educated. We don't know why God chooses these prophets. We just know those are the rules. Tell people what they're doing wrong. Tell them what's going to happen if they keep doing it wrong. Comfort them if things go bad. We don't know why they're chosen. That is, funny enough, the rule of the prophet if you're a male prophet. If you're a female prophet, there's an entirely different set of rules in that there are no rules. Because there are only 3 women who are declared prophetess, although later the Talmud will say a couple others. In the Bible, there's only 3 men. We've talked about one of them, which was Miriam. Is Miriam going around the whole time telling people what they're doing wrong? And that if they don't behave, they're going to be punished and then consoling them? No, she doesn't do that at all. Moses does it a little bit, but she basically dances with the women. And then she kind of semi-rebels against Moses twice, and then she dies. And that's pretty much all we know about her. Who is the second woman who is called a prophet? And she is she's less known than Miriam, but she has a lot more airtime. She is a much bigger character in terms of what she does because we can see it and it's not hidden. She is called a prophetess, but she's not just a prophetess, she's also a judge. So we're talking about, of course, Deborah or Deborah, maybe the most powerful female character in the Bible because she's both a prophetess and a judge. And you say, well, what does a judge do? There's 2 different kinds of judges. There's the judge who sits on a court, and there's the judge who's a warrior. She is the judge who is a warrior. So she is both a prophet and a warrior while being a woman. So she is the only woman judge and one of only 3 women prophet. And she by far has the biggest parts, even though Miriam is found scattered throughout 4 books. She has a very specific part just about her where she's not actually the side character, she's the central character. How many of us have heard of Deborah or Deborah? My daughter's Hebrew name is Deborah, but for a friend of ours. So Deborah is a prophetess. So in the book of Judges, she's the 4th judge. Now, again, what does it mean to be a judge? After the Israelites take over Canaan or Canaan, all the different tribes live in their own areas. They're not connected. They're connected. Sometimes they fight together. Sometimes they fight against each other. They're not connected. And at times in the individual tribes, a super warrior will be born and will become one of their leaders. Some of these super warriors fail. The most famous who fails is Samson. And some of them succeed brilliantly. And the most famous who succeeds brilliantly is Deborah. Deborah is probably the most famous of them, not only because she's a woman, because she is so successful. So there's a song called Deborah. There's a lot about her. So who is Deborah? She is a woman who basically sits beneath a palm tree and gives out advice. That's what she is. She is kind of like the kind of spiritual woman who will sit under a tree and people come to her and ask her for advice. And that's what she does. That's what we know about her. She is apparently quite brilliant. And during this time, they're being oppressed by Jabin or the king of Canaan. And while they're being oppressed, the leader of the military, his name is Barak. Of course, you may know the name today. It's a very popular name in Israel. Ehud Barak, of course, was a former prime minister. It means like, it's both a type of weather. It's like a lightning strike, and it's also a military term for lightning strike. So it's both a military term and weather. So Barak goes to Deborah and says, I'd like some advice on fighting off this guy. And she gives him some advice. In many ways, Barak, though, becomes the hero because he does something very strange. He then asks Deborah to go with him into battle, which is apparently unheard of. Think about this. Think about our military going to a civilian and saying, we want you to lead us into battle. And so when he asks her, Deborah says, I'll be happy to do it, but I hope you understand that if I go into battle with you, all the songs, all the praise, all the kudos are going to be given to me. And you as a male general will be considered subservient and almost maybe have some negative stereotypes because you let a woman take charge. And Barak says, good, let's do it. So Barak is willing to give up his reputation, willing to support a woman who is going to be overtly giving him advice during a major battle. And so they go into battle against Sisera, who is the army leader of the other side. And Deborah prophesizes that they're going to win, and they do. They basically, and I'm not a military person, but it's pretty obvious, they take the higher ground. They fight during a rainstorm, so the chariots are all stuck in the mud and basically make all of the soldiers sitting ducks. And that's how they win pretty easily. So it's a big victory, complete victory. Afterwards, there is a ending sentence that basically says, after the battle, there was peace in the land for 40 years. So that is the greatest victory of any of the judges. Not only did she win the battle, but 40 years of peace because of her. So Deborah has become a pretty major character. She certainly should probably be even more of a major character, especially in the modern world as women's rights and issues have come to the forefront. Because unlike Miriam, she is not a secondary character. Unlike Miriam, she actually has a voice. And so even though Miriam is much more well known, and obviously she's in the Torah, and Deborah is not, she's in the book of Judges, Deborah is in many ways the most successful woman in the Bible. because she is taking charge of a military. She gives advice, and whatever she does afterwards helps sustain peace for 40 years, which, as we know, during this time was not always easy. And she is shown as a brilliant military strategist, probably without any training. And she's called both a judge and a prophetess. And it's very rare for someone to have two positions. If you're a prophet, you're really a prophet. If you're a judge, you're a judge. If you're a king, you're a king. If you're a priest, you're a priest. Rarely do people overtake different worlds. Samuel may be another example, possibly Moses, but really she is one of the few characters that is given designated two major titles at the same time. She's one of the few major characters who is completely successful in what she does. We know Moses is the most famous character, but he fails a lot. King David fails a lot. She does not. Not only that, there's a song of Deborah that is found during Judges when they speak about her, and there's not that many songs in the Bible. This is probably the second most famous one after the Song of the Sea. And it's a little different in how it describes the victory, but of course that's probably not uncommon that when you sing a song, it kind of changes the way things really happen. So this is Deborah. She is a major hero and led an actual force from the tribes of Ephraim, Benjamin, Zebulun, I think Issachar, Naphtali. Any questions or any thoughts? Now, what is the time period? We're probably talking somewhere in the 1100s or late 12th century, early 11th century BCE. Now you have to also, yes, Larry.
So just going back to the time period, that was going to be my question. Judges came before kings, right?
Right, exactly, right
So
before.
what was there a, I mean, how is that decided that, they wanted a judge first, or, they didn't want to go to a king kind of thing? It was still a tribal kind of a society.
Exactly.
Right? And did
Yes,
Deborah come from a particular tribe?
exactly. So when we read the Exodus from Egypt, we tend to think of that whole group of Israelites as one group, and they're not. They're individual groups going together. So they leave according to their tribes. So probably while living in Egypt, they were living in their tribes. And when they left, they stayed in their tribes, even though they were moving together. But once they settled the land, each tribe moved to its own area, except for the tribe of Levi, which were the priests. So every tribe is living in their own area. And so they're fighting skirmishes against these Canaanite peoples from time to time. And so the tribe of, in this case, Ephraim, which is the most powerful northern tribe where she comes from, teams up with a couple of other tribes to defeat one of this Canaanite groups. So sometimes my tribe might be fighting you're the Canaanites. Sometimes I may need help, so I get a couple other Israel tribes. And so this skirmishing is going on for a while. Inevitably, the judges start to fail because the people they are fighting become more and more powerful until they end up fighting a very powerful group that has moved into the area during the time of Samson. And of course, we're talking about the Philistines. So one of the reasons that the Israelites unite and create a king is because the Philistines are too strong for individual tribes or even groups of tribes to take. Basically, the Philistines have moved in. They live in what is like Gaza today. They probably came from Southern Europe, and they were warriors. They also had iron. So they probably introduced iron to the area. The rest of the area is in the Bronze Age. This is the switch from Bronze Age to Iron Age. And so you have Philistines with iron, obviously, and I'm not a military force, but if an iron sword is hitting a bronze sword, eventually the bronze sword is going to break. They also had chariots. They had skills at sea. And so they're picking off all these individual tribes without much, difficulty. So all the tribes get together, choose a king. Saul, he's not successful. The next king David is, and David defeats the Philistines, and that's why it became a kingship. But they didn't want to start. So the best analogy I give is America. America is the perfect analogy. After we won the revolution, we win the revolution, I think it ends in 1783. George Washington is not elected till 1790. What happens in between? In between, each state, instead of having the Constitution, they use the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation basically say each state is its own nation. We have a very weak central government that can't do very much. And it wasn't working. The central government was too weak. Even like stamps or taxes, from one state to the other could be completely different. Being married, so eventually all the states got together and said the Articles of Confederation are not working. We need a stronger central government. Some people wanted it really strong, Alexander Hamilton. Some people wanted it not so strong, Thomas Jefferson. But in the end, they united as one country and became the United States of America, as opposed to the, whatever. I think that's what it was called anyway. But the Articles of the Constitution actually gave the central government powers. And throughout the ages, the central government is given more or less power depending upon but at the very beginning, there was almost no power. You couldn't even raise an army. The armies were still up to the individual states. This is what failed the Israelites at first. They didn't have a central power, so they weren't united. Deborah is the most powerful and successful of the judges, which is important for us to see, because in ancient books we've referred to previously, like the Iliad or the Odyssey, the heroes are always shown with these incredible skills, and almost always we dwell on their successes and their attributes, their wonderful attributes. The Bible is not afraid of saying what you did wrong. So in the case of the Deborah, it always says what she did right. However, the next judges fail one after the other. So the book itself is willing to talk about failings. It's just she doesn't fail. So it's not like they're just hyping her up and they're hyping every single judge and every judge is amazing. Actually not. Some of the judges do very well, and the latter judges mostly fail. Samson is the last one, and he fails most miserably. Flossie, good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi. What has me puzzled is how the Orthodox didn't include women in prayer so much they were excluded. And then a woman comes along here, becomes a judge, becomes a warrior prophet. It's inconsistent. How does that explain it?
Well, again, you have to understand, in a more traditional world, it's considered equality between men and women. It's just a different way of living. There's always been room for the exceptions here and there. So the exceptions to the rule, but if the entire army was, all the leaders were women, that would have probably been more of a problem. So, and that's pretty much how life has been throughout our world. We think of America. America did not give rights to women, but there are always exceptions where women became incredibly important. Think of Mary Curie, for instance. Mm-hmm. Double Nobel Prize winning scientist, the only person I think ever to win it twice. And she was a woman. Well, she was the only one, there's always been the exception. So the women who did succeed had to be so extraordinary beyond compare. So that's, it's the same thing with African Americans in America during slavery times and civil rights. You find a scientist here or a leader here, but it's very rare, but the exception is allowed as long as it's one. Same thing with Jews. You could have a Jewish, until recent times, you could have a Jewish mayor here, or maybe a congressperson here, or the head of a company here, but you couldn't be all Jewish. And today it's changed quite a bit. Thank goodness. We still have a ways to go, though.
What was her age when she was doing this?
That's a good question. I don't think that was given, but I think the idea is she was fairly young when she is that's a good question. I don't know how old she was. You get the idea that she's fairly young when she starts it, because of her, there's 40 years of peace. So that means she probably lived 40 more years, or that. So that's a good question. I don't even remember how old was that. That's something for the computer.
Rabbi, you said it was 1200 BCE.
It was probably more 1100s, late 1100s to,
Okay.
it's like late 12th century to early mid 10th century. And it's no, I don't think it have the age. I have the no. I'd have the general period where she lived, but I don't know the age. The general period I gave is right, but I don't know what. Oh, it says 40 years. She was 40 years. 40 years when she was doing it.
Ah.
Oh, okay, so she was not young, because 40 at that time was actually not young at all.
To us.
Yeah, young to me too, but at that time, obviously, living a long life was not. So a 40-year-old soldier was probably not. Probably you would have been a great leader to reach that age to be a soldier. Any other questions on Deborah or Deborah? Either way, Sheila.
2 questions. 1, who wrote the Book of Judges? And
That's a-
second, was Deborah married? Did she ever
Good-
marry and have
Good
children?
question. I don't think Deborah is her husband is told, but I think she was married. Let's see here. I don't know if I thought she was, but I'm not sure. Let's see here. Yeah, she is married, but I don't know if they give I'm pretty sure she's married. Let's see if they give the name of the husband. And what was the second question?
Who wrote the Book of Judges?
Oh, who wrote the Book of Judges? Well, that's another question. Now, according to tradition, it was written by either the judges themselves or people who were alongside the judges. So in the case of Deborah, it was believed that Barak or another guy named Gideon wrote it. According to the Talmud, it's Samuel who wrote the Book of Judges, because Samuel is kind of like the next book, and Samuel kind of transcends the period from Judges to Kings. So who really wrote it? Probably, some believe it was written later, as late as the 6th century, during the time of exile, while we were in Babylon. But we don't know who wrote it for sure. It's part of the Deuteronomic history. So like, this is part of the historical novels that is considered starting with Exodus and goes to Kings 2. So that is considered a narrative. Genesis is considered a kind of like a precursor, so it's part of whatever group wrote the Bible from Exodus to Kings 2. So it could have been partially written by scholars in Judah during the 10th century, scholars in the north in the 9th century. It could have been written by somebody we're going to talk about in a second, or it could have been passed down and written down in the 6th century or even 5th century. So and it's not necessarily all written together. This is a perfect example of how things could be put together, because they're all individuals. It's one individual story after another. So they could have been different stories put together. Now, what you also see is it was probably, considering that she is from the tribe of Ephraim, which is the second most powerful tribe and the most powerful tribe in the north, if it's written later on, obviously, that's why some would say it was written in the 9th century by people in the north, because that's the tribe of Ephraim. And if you're writing your history, you want your heroes to be the best. And obviously, since Ephraim is one of the 2 strongest tribes, their hero has to be a top hero. So that's another thought. That's probably more likely what happened. And any other questions?
Yeah, could you also fill in a little bit more of after she dies, or her 40-year reign, so to speak, was the Jewish people united? In other words, did Ephraim kind of now become the leader of the, and was she like the prime minister? And then other people came along that were more inept and lost battles and,
Well, that's a good question. Now, remember, when there's 40 years of peace, that is not necessarily for all Israel. That is for their tribe, for their area. So she is not what you would call an official leader. She would be more like a Mahatma Gandhi. She is not the president. She is the spiritual guide that everybody goes to for advice. Like Mahatma Gandhi was never an official leader, but he was an unofficial leader. That would have been probably what she was. And probably whoever was the actual leader would come to her, and her power was probably given to her by the people because of how good she was. She is definitely probably one of the reasons Ephraim maintains itself as a powerful nation, because when the nations are gathered together and become one, Ephraim will be the most powerful nation in the north, and Judah will be the most powerful nation in the south. And if you think about it logically, if you have 40 years of peace, what does that mean? That means more people, because people aren't dying in war. That means you've got more money because you're not spending it and losing it. You're not forced to spend all your money on military efforts. So if you have 40 years of peace, that is a great amount of time to really strengthen yourself. So certainly that is one of the reasons they became such a powerful tribe.
Now, the official prophets came a little later, the so-called Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And was she ever considered to be included in the book of prophets as well as the book of Judges? No, because the book of prophets, you have this history from Exodus to Kings 2 that goes straight forward. Like there's a straight arrow. The prophets are books like of individuals inside these books. So like the prophet of Isaiah is during the time period of the kings, but he's not officially attached to that book. He's kind of like a second book referencing somebody in the first one. So was she ever considered a prophet? Probably not. She's a little early for the books of prophets. They don't start till about 200 years after her. But the books of you got to remember, you go Genesis is its own central thing. Then you got Exodus through Kings 2, and that's a history. Then the prophets start a different way. The prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the three major prophets, and they go in order chronologically. But then you have the minor prophets that go in order also chronologically, but they overlap. So it's kind of like they start like Isaiah, Isaiah's here, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, but then the next prophets you have like Hosea is during the time of Isaiah, and they go through, and then the last prophet, Malachi, is actually after Ezekiel. So, yes, Noah.
Oh, I just wanted to say something to Flossie, but I see she's disappeared.
Did Flossie disappear? You're still on mute, Jeff. You're still on mute, Jeff.
Where is she?
Loss, you're being paged. She just went into the kitchen for a second.
All right,
Okay, this has nothing to do.
Here she is.
Flossie, it's Noel, and I just love your name. I love you could have been a prophet with a name like Flossie.
Flossie is the fourth prophetess in Jewish history, just in case you're wondering. So
I thought by her saying Flossie, a lot of us when we were kids read Flossie, Bossy. Remember there were rabbits with that name.
I've never heard of it.
You have to get it for your children.
Bossy the cow.
Okay.
That is it. All right. So we took a little bit longer on Deborah, but obviously because she is really an interesting character. It's a really short book, but again, I mean, really short section of the book. but next we're going to go to the last.
I just wanted to,
Sure, Judy, I'm sorry to hear you. Sorry.
Oh,
What's your question?
that's okay. No, I just wanted to add about Flossie, because remember Dick and Jane, and who were the brother and sister, Freddie and Flossie.
Really? I've never
Don't
read
you
Dick and Jane. I've just heard it.
Remember?
No.
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
did you?
did we all learn to read with those books? Sheila, you're a reading specialist, right?
Yeah, I remember the Dick and Jane, but I don't
Yeah.
remember the sister and
And
brother.
The little brother and sister, Freddie and
You
Flossie.
learn something every day.
Oh
If you
my
learn one
God.
thing today, learn that Freddie and Flossie were Dick and Jane.
Flossie just ran to get the book.
My mother was a second grade
Yeah.
teacher. We had all these books.
Oh,
And
that,
Dick and
that's
Jane.
probably worse.
Okay, we'll check
No,
you
I'm
out.
talking about the
Is that
little,
is that in a first edition?
no, I
Yeah,
have one here
Right.
somewhere.
It's from a garage sale.
Actually,
Wow.
I have some of the originals from my mother's classroom from back in,
Oh,
I
God.
won't even tell you when she started
Right.
teaching in 32.
Well, my wife brought her favorite book as a child, which was her mom's favorite book. She went online to get it, and this book is minimally, she found one copy that was like 50 cents, and every other copy was $70 plus. So this little book is now worth at least $70. It probably cost $1.
Judy will have to talk.
I
This
want to
is
see.
from
I've never seen the book before. I've heard of course Fun with Dick and Jane, but I've never seen the book.
Oh my God.
Right,
Okay,
so we
goodbye.
learned so much in this class. Flossie and what was the other brother? Flossie and
Freddie.
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 And Flossie.
Freddie and Flossie.
Freddie. All right.
Oh, my God, never knew it.
Rabbi,
All right. Yes.
just in a quick question, you had mentioned she doesn't seem to get as much press as some of the other people. And I'm wondering if that's because we don't read, every week we read a Torah portion,
Right.
right?
That's exactly it.
Obviously not in the Torah portion, right?
Right.
Then we read a Haftorah portion, which usually comes from the prophets.
Did you learn to read with
So occasionally we do read something from the Book of Kings. Is there anything that we read, any Haftorah portions from Judges?
One of the her particular section is a Haftorah portion.
Oh, it
I
is.
think it's during the Song of the Sea because she is the Song of Deborah. But you're right. We read the portion, so obviously the women in the Torah are going to be more famous. Plus, and we're not going to get today, we have two women who have their own books that are used for particular holidays. Ruth is read, of course, for Shavuos, and the whole book, the whole holiday Purim is based on the Book of Esther. So obviously they're going to be much more well known. But in terms of what they did, obviously Deborah is way ahead of everybody because although Esther obviously saved the people, so that would be pretty impressive. Ruth is a story about an individual, but Deborah is an incredibly gifted person. She's considered one of what they would call the 7 prophets, but there are only 3 named in the Bible. The others would be Sarah, Hannah, Abigail, and Esther. The third prophet S in the Bible is a very mysterious person. We know almost nothing about her. She's only mentioned once, and then she's in the Torah and the Bible, and then she's referred to one other time. Her name is Huldah, and she's only mentioned in 2 Kings 22 and 2 Chronicles 34. That's the only time. And 2 Chronicles 34 is a reference back to what she did in 2 Kings. Who is this mysterious woman? We do not know. She has to be on the list of prophetesses by the Talmud because she's actually called a prophetess in the Bible. Otherwise, so this is a very strange story because the mere fact she's in it. So during the time of Josiah, who was a king at the end of the 7th century, he has a group of priests who find a holy book that has been lost to the ages. And he wants to see if this book is legitimate. Is this really a book from God? And say, go to this woman called Huldah and basically says, is this legitimately a book of God? And she says, yes. And that's all we know about her. So that's the only thing we know her. So obviously she must have been pretty important. One of the gates of the temple today, when you go to Israel, you go into Jerusalem, and the wall, I'm not the temple, the wall, One of the walls is called the Huldah Gate. That's how most people know the name today. So if you've gone to Israel, you've probably gone into her gate. So all we know is she was the wife of a guy named Shalom, who was a keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem, and that's all we know. Now, what is this book that we're talking about? Who is this prophetic oracle? Some believe it was the Torah itself. Scholars believe it was the book of Deuteronomy, because Josiah is considered it's during this time that it's thought that the book of Deuteronomy is created. And so some would say she okays the Torah. Scholars would say she's okaying the book of Deuteronomy because they believe it's written during this time period. There's some very interesting reasons they think so. Has to do with the requirements in Deuteronomy for the king. So in Deuteronomy, there are requirements and laws for a king. What's so amazing about it is it's going to be hundreds of years after the time period of Deuteronomy that Israel is going to actually have a king. So they're basing writing rules for kings in the year 1300 or 1250, and the first king isn't going to come till the year 1050. So you're basically writing rules for the future 200 years, which does not make sense, obviously. How can you write rules today for 200 years from the future? So she is the one who basically says, oh, sorry, Judy says, Freddie and Flossie were the younger siblings of the Bobbsey twins. I do not know who they are.
You have to read the first sentence.
Do I? Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry for my dementia. Freddie and Flossie were the younger siblings of the Bobbsey twins. Duh.
Thank you. Okay.
She that wrote all that. I'm just reading. I'm the prophet here. I'm just
You
relaying.
don't know who that is? You're a baby.
I don't know who. I think I've heard the phrase Bobbsey twins, but I didn't realize that I don't know who they are. Is it part of a reading series for kids? Like
No, they were
Uh,
fiction for children.
Okay. So this is Huldah, as opposed to Deborah, who is a prophetess who does all of these amazing things. Huldah does one thing, and what does she do? She says, yes. That's basically what she does. She puts her stamp on the legitimacy of this foreign book, and so now it's going to be read. And so you could call her the mother of Deuteronomy. She's not really called that, but she did get a name, a gate named after her. So another interesting thing, if you're a traditional person, you would say it was Huldah who said the Torah was legitimate. So it's a woman who gives the seal of approval for it. So that's pretty cool.
How do you spell her name?
Huldah. And you find her, you find her in Kings 2, chapter 30, chapter 22 in Kings 2, and chapter 34 in Chronicles 2.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I just found a news article from the 17th of Adar in the year of 1140 BCE. And Deborah declares war on the Canaanites, just going
Nice.
back a little bit. And what's interesting here is they do mention all of the tribes that were involved.
Oh, good, yeah.
Were gathered together. But there's another very interesting article here.
I'm gonna get that book one of these days.
Yeah, it's an interesting book. They're talking about 7 face death penalty for making iron tools. I don't know if you can see this down here. And apparently, the Israelites at that time were under the rule of a king Yavin.
Yep.
And apparently, he had issued an edict that they could not make. It was forbidden them, strictly forbidden, in an ordinance that he had issued. And they had imprisoned, and of course, this is fictitious, but they had imprisoned Israelites for making iron tools, which goes to what you said about, the iron versus the.
Right, and this is the very beginning of the Iron Age in this area of the world. It's come in I'm sure they probably had some iron. People had probably seen them before. But in terms of mass, where all your weapons are iron, That's when the Philistines probably come in, bringing a lot from Europe. But obviously iron, it's not, the Iron Age didn't start on the year 1140, everybody has iron. It takes, it takes 100 years or so to get into that age completely. And from one place to another, technology does not spread as fast as it does today, obviously. Any other thoughts on Huldah? All right, so again, she is probably the least well-known of all the women we'll talk about. Although obviously very important, and she also makes a prophecy for Josiah saying all is going well. So Josiah is basically considered the last great king of the Jews before the destruction. There'll be two afterwards, but he is considered the last great one. Any thoughts yet? And then we'll go on to, we'll start a little bit on the next one I'm going to talk about, which is a very prominent character, because I didn't want to do just the minor characters. We won't get through all of it possibly, but the one I want to talk about is a woman named, well, actually we'll skip this and we'll go to one with a little shorter version. You know what, I'll go to somebody else who's shorter so we can finish her. Let's go to Rahab. I don't know if you've ever heard of Rahab. The harlot of Jericho, she's also known as. So you have to go back to what's going on. The Torah ends with the death of Moses, with people on the edge of the Jordan, ready to go into the land of Israel, and they're going to be led by Joshua. So Joshua leads them in, and the first city they come to that they attack is the city of Jericho. The famous city, 7 times around, the walls fall down. So they're approaching the walls of Jericho, and Josiah sends spies to check out the city. And they arrive and they meet this harlot named Rahab, and she lives in the wall, basically. And when the king finds out that there are spies, he starts looking for them, and she hides them. So she hides the spies from the guards. And then when guards leave her and she's through questioning, she lets them out through her window. And what she does is basically say, I believe in your God. I know you are strong and you're going to take this city. Please allow me and my family to live. And when they come back, they tell him, okay, make sure your family is with you when we attack in your room. So this is thus what scholars call the magic apartment. Why is it magic apartment? Because the battle, her house is untouched. What's the problem with that? Problem with her house being untouched is that her house is built into the wall. And what happens to the wall?
Well done.
The wall crumbles, but her house is not touched. So there is a discrepancy here that they may not have figured out, or there's a lot of discussion as to why her house is magically sitting in the air untouched when everything else falls. But that's just a side story. So she basically rescues them, and they allow her to live, and then she becomes part of the Israelite group afterwards. So this is an interesting character because she's talked a lot about in rabbinic literature later. Because unlike Deborah or Huldah or Miriam, she's actually a harlot. It actually says that. So to have a harlot help save the Israelites by saving the spies is a strange thing. A lot of people will reference a Christian harlot as well as maybe being based on this character. So what happens afterwards, we don't know. We don't hear about her, but there's a lot of rabbinical literature about her. One of the things some of the rabbis or sages through the years try to do is change her from being a harlot, make her something else, because we don't want to have our history based on a harlot. It's very easy to do. All you have to do is change one word. You just have to change the meaning of the word harlot, because it's just mentioned once, or twice. So basically, if you change the meaning of harlot to somebody who is an innkeeper or someone who sells food, then that changes the whole thing. Others in the Talmud say she was a harlot, but she was also a top one. She was like the one who was the best of the best and the most beautiful. And so she knew all the big machers in Jericho. That's how she knew the Israelites were going to take the city, because she was well informed. So some would say most go that route, although Rashi, probably the most famous, says she wasn't. Later, of course, rabbis have to deal with the fact that she is with the Israelites by saying she converted. It's not stated she converted, but the rabbis later say she converted. So she became Jewish. So some of us maybe who are descendants of Jews thousands of years, which we have no way of proving whatsoever, could be descended from her. Her name means broad, which I always think is really funny. It means broad, which means long, but in English, it's funny because broad is a synonym for woman, although not one we use today. In the Hebrew, it doesn't have, that joke doesn't work, but in English it does. So that's why it's I think it's kind of funny, but that's just me. Josephus talks about her as well, the great historian from the 1st century CE, and he says that she was an innkeeper. And so that in itself, though, can be misleading, because apparently during the time of Josephus, the word he uses for innkeeper can be a regular innkeeper or an innkeeper who runs a brothel, and those words are synonymous. So he makes it, because of the word he uses, it's mysterious. But most, according to the Bible, she's a harlot. Obviously, words change over time. She could have been something else, but who knows? But it's interesting that this is yet another non-Jewish individual who aids the Israelites, kind of like Jethro, kind of like Shiphrah and Puah, like Melchizedek, which we've talked about before. Actually, I'm not sure if we have. So non-Jews who support the one God idea, and in this case, probably converted, in other cases, who know, but it's another non-Jew who does some great things. It also shows a lot about redemptive qualities, that she's in a field that later is not considered a very good field to be in. Like in different time periods, the field itself has been considered lower level or higher level, just depending on what time. We know in Europe, during several centuries of the last millennium, if you were a harlot, you were much more educated than a duchess. Women were not allowed to read unless you were in this, what are they called? Oh my goodness. The French word for, what's it called? I thought it's, what's the name of the woman? Not concubine. I forgot the name that they use. What's it? Anybody know the name of the educated harlots in Europe? Good. I don't feel so bad that I'm the only one who, I'm not the only one who.
Courtesans.
Huh?
Courtesans?
Yeah, courtesan. Thank you. So that was it. So, good job. So, yes, Sheila.
What consisted of conversion back then? I mean, when you said they converted, or they couldn't go to classes.
Yeah.
What was the process of converting someone then?
You just said you're Jewish, basically.
That's it?
If you're a woman, you'd marry a guy. You'd be Jewish automatically. If you're a man, you'd have to be circumcised, but that would probably be it. Probably would keep the laws of the people. You just basically say I'm Jewish. Later it becomes a different case, but back then they just kind of melded into society. Although there were servants and people who worked who weren't Jewish, would keep the same rules, but they weren't Jewish. Flossie, and you're on mute.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
go,
Now I
go.
can talk. While we're talking about women in Jewish history, what do we consider Esther? There's Purim coming up.
Esther was the one I probably should have started with today because I meant to get through to her. She was next. We'll do her next week, I guess. Esther is, of course, a major character in Jewish history, and as a woman is one of the most one of the preeminent ones since she has her own book. And so her and Ruth are the only ones with books. Ruth probably a little bit more so because the focus is entirely on her and her mother-in-law almost throughout the book, whereas Esther is one of the several main characters and would be considered a co-hero with probably Mordecai. But yeah, she is way up there. She's got a whole holiday. I mean, another woman has a holiday.
But she doesn't have a gate named after her.
No, she does not. And she does not have a gate named after her. That is right. So I'm going to put Huldah above her.
Rabbi, do we know what happened with Esther after the story of Purim, or just?
I think they talk about now. Remember, the story of Purim is a little bit different than when we know it, because when we do the Purim spiels, we tend to gloss over the rest of it. So basically, there is more to the book than just hanging of Haman, because afterwards there's a lot more battles, and it gets a little bit more aggressive, as the word says. What happens to Esther? I don't know. I don't think it actually tells us what happens to her. I know she obviously becomes his wife. I can't remember if they mention when she dies. Let's see here. Anybody? Let's see here. I can't remember. Oh my goodness, I can't remember. So I'll check that. Let me check that up.
What happens to Vashti?
We don't know. She basically disappears. Probably was killed. Most likely Ahasuerus killed her, but we don't know. There's a phraseology that leads you to believe that she was killed, but the word, it could be something else. Sent away. It's almost assumed she was killed, but it's not definitive. But most likely she was killed by Ahasuerus. He was not a great king, to say the least. In fact, they spent an inordinate amount of time talking about how he's not a great king. What do I mean? From the very beginning of the book of Esther, what does it start with? It starts with Ahasuerus throwing a party for 1.5 years straight. So obviously, if you're throwing 1.5 years straight party that consists of having your queen dance naked in front of your buddies, having a year-long beauty pageant to select your next wife, you're probably not the greatest king of all time. So, but that's just my view. All right. So is it okay if we do Women of the Bible one more week? And we'll do that next week. Now, I had a question also. Is it a problem if I move the 17th, start at 11? I was asked to be in a meeting at 10. Does that make a big deal to anybody? Just that one time? Okay, good. So we'll move that to the 11th, to 11 on the 17th. I'm part of a task force with the mayor, and he asked all of us to be there, and I missed the last couple of things. So perfect. All right.
Flexible.
All right.
Rabbi, a couple of announcements, if you would.
Please.
Yeah, tonight they're having something from Rutgers University, the Bildner Center, and I may have sent this out already, but they're doing an interesting talk on basically the Jews of Tevye, the whole business of Russian Jews.
Oh, cool.
And, I think it's just the entire history. I was surprised when I looked at it to find out that there were probably the largest immigration that came to Israel is from Russia. Much more, almost 8 or 10 times, I think, what the United States immigration was, to Israel. So it's an enormous number of people.
Are you talking about the post-Soviet one? Or are you talking about
Well, I'm recorded history, which is probably from 1900 or so.
Okay.
Charts that I saw. I don't know how accurate it was, but
Well, they may be talking about the post-Soviet Union because over 1 million Jews went to Israel, which is a really high number for a small country. But I don't know if they mean post-19. They may mean post-1924 as well. I'll have to see what it means.
yeah, I think it was even earlier than the the immigration after the dissolution of the
That's
Soviet Union. The other thing is there are two other events that are interesting. The Jewish
I don't know
Literature
what it
Center,
is.
which
I
I
couldn't
always,
hear it. You wrote
talked
it down.
about, the one in Massachusetts. They're having a talk. I think it's the end of February on 3 Yiddish women poets, of which Emma Lazarus is one, and 2 of the others I forget who they are. But it's kind of a conversation between the 3 of them that will be interesting. And the third one that I wanted to mention was that. Tonight, or I think it's on Super Bowl Sunday at noon, though. Several of the congregations in northern New Jersey are having a discussion with 3 different points of view on Jewish democracy and religion. Can Israel, how does a country survive? And one of them, I think, is the former minister of culture and whatever it was of Israel, who's going to be on together with 2 other members who were, maybe have different points of view. So
There's
it's
so many awesome things now out there because of the COVID. You can look at all the positives.
I'll send those out and maybe
Yes,
you could
send
forward
them
it to
out,
Noel.
Larry.
Yeah, maybe you could forward it to Noel as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you send it to me, I will forward it to you.
Rabbi,
Flossie,
I saw in the newspaper at the JEA, you're speaking tomorrow.
yes. I'll be doing a little bit of what we're doing now, and it was completely coincidental.
I thought.
I'm talking about big, small personalities. So tomorrow I'll be speaking on a couple of the ones we've talked about, but not all, because I'm also going to do men. It'll be part men and part women. But a lot of what we did, and I was so funny because I saw that. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing that. But it was just coincidental. So
Well,
Enjoyed your talk on Saturday about Bruce Feiler and transitions, and
yeah,
I think that would make an interesting subject for all of us after
Oh,
we
yeah.
watch the book, maybe. Or there was a video, I think, of some of the interviews that
Right.
that he's been going out on the book.
you know what I think would be great? If Larry, you would read the book and then take notes on every chapter
tour.
and then send it to us. And then while you explain the book to us, and then I'll have some stuff ready for.
Better than that, you could just watch the video of the interviews.
Yes, that'd be good too.
He's had so many book tour interviews now, and you can hear it in his own words. He'll explain
Yes.
it to you much better than I could.
He is a really nice man, yeah, and very accomplished. And of course, I talk to his parents all the time, and they're very proud of him, obviously.
But I think as we go back, you could think of the transitions, that he talks about. He says there are several in our lives, and the transitions are not just a momentary thing. They sometimes last for years.
Yeah.
In particular, the death of a person or something like that they kind of linger on. And it just, I think would be an interesting topic for,
I think it'd be great. All right.
Rabbi, this is on JEA site.
Yeah, it'll be on the JA side. So it'll be a little similar. It's going to be a shorter one. It's like 45 minutes on one time. If a lot of you are there, I'll try and go to the ones we haven't done first. I think I'm doing Jethro, Melchizedek. I'm doing Rahab. I think I'm doing Rahab. I forgot who else I'm doing. And I'm doing Shifra Pua. So I'll try and get the ones we haven't done.
Okay, but it's through the JEA then.
Yeah, it should be fun. And then I'm also doing the podcast today at 3.
Yes.
the link for the JEA is on the Mikveh Israel website.
No, we did not put it on our website. It's on the JA one. We should have.
It's on the JEA website.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think we did. That would be my fault. I forgot to mention it.
Thanks, Floss.
Oh,
Thank you. And you guys all, thank you so much. Congratulations again to Judy. Again, everyone stay safe as you wait for your second shot, or hopefully have already had that shot. And we look to see you pretty soon in person.
You
And if
too.
anybody wants to participate in Purim in any way, just let me know. It'll be really easy. In fact, if you, I'm not sure how he's going to do I don't know how he's going to put all the video together with the 2 songs, but it should be pretty cool.
Love the video, the little shot, photo you sent out of your son eating the ice cream cone.
I know my wife took that. He is so adorable. This kid, oh, my kids are so adorable. Not as adorable as your grandkids, obviously, because they get a higher level of durability for grandkids than
But
kids.
you should give equal time to your daughter.
I do. I mean, the
You don't
pictures I
get-
put up are not the ones I take. Those are the ones my wife takes.
I
It's just
see.
my daughter is not, she doesn't look at the camera. She likes to look away, but I have tons of her pictures. My daughter is probably the most beautiful woman on planet Earth.
But
I'm sure.
Tied with my wife.
Could you send it out again? We never got that picture that Larry's talking
It's
about.
on
Oh,
Facebook.
just go to my Facebook
Oh,
page.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he did have a picture of both of them eating ice cream first. I saw.
Yeah.
I saw.
Well, she had one of her doing it too, but the pictures
right.
of her didn't come out great. Just
Michael? Michael?
Yes.
I
Yes.
called you to share something. Can you call me?
and Noel's already left, so I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
I'm at a conference right now, so I'm going to go back to it. But I will see hopefully some of you later today or tomorrow. And again, if you want to participate in the forum, just let me know. It'll be easy for you. If you want to have a skit play, all you have to do is go on Zoom and be part of it. No big deal. All right, see you guys later. Stay safe.
Okay, you too.